The trauma bay was dripping with blood, but no one could get within 10 feet of the dying Navy SEAL. A massive Belgian Malinois stood over his shattered chest, teeth bared, ready to kill. They were seconds away from shooting the dog until a rookie nurse whispered 4 forbidden words. The cold, sterile air of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany was usually a comfort to 24-year-old Evelyn Jenkins. As a rookie trauma nurse, she relied on the predictable hum of the fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial bleach to keep her grounded. She had only been stationed at the massive military hospital for 3 weeks, a fresh-faced civilian contractor thrust into the harrowing reality of a combat trauma center. But on the night of October 14th, all predictability vanished. At 2,300 hours, the red strobe lights in the emergency receiving bay began to flash, accompanied by the blaring, high-pitched wail of the incoming casualty alarm. "Angel flight touching down in 2 minutes," Dr. Robert Mitchell roared, bursting through the double doors of Bay 4. He was a veteran trauma surgeon with bags under his eyes that looked like bruises. "Listen up. We've got a Tier 1 asset inbound from a black op in the Horn of Africa. Shrapnel wounds to the lower extremities, possible arterial bleed, blunt force trauma to the chest. He's coded twice in the air. I need O-negative blood primed and ready, thoracostomy trays open, and everyone on their absolute A-game." Evelyn felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. She scrambled to set up the IV lines and lay out the surgical instruments. A Tier 1 designation meant Special Mission Units Delta Force, or DEVGRU, the elite of the elite Navy SEALs. These were the ghosts who fought the wars no one ever read about in the news. The heavy thud of Black Hawk helicopter rotors vibrated through the concrete floor, rattling the stainless steel trays. The doors blew open, letting in a gust of freezing autumn rain and the overwhelming stench of jet fuel, sweat, and massive amounts of copper-scented blood. A gurney was wheeled in at a frantic, chaotic pace by 4 flight medics. But something was terribly, horrifyingly wrong. The medics weren't pushing the gurney from the sides. They were practically holding it at arm's length, shouting at each other in panicked voices. Lying on the blood-soaked mattress was a massive man in shredded tactical multicam gear. His face was chalk white, his left leg a mangled mess of tourniquets and field dressings that were already failing. It was Chief Petty Officer David Rollins, a veteran operator. But standing directly over Rollins' chest, straddling the dying man's torso, was a 90-pound Belgian Malinois. The dog named Titan was a nightmare of muscle, fur, and pure primal aggression. His tactical harness was slick with his handler's blood. The leash had snapped during the chaotic medevac. Every muscle in the canine's body was coiled like a steel spring. His ears were pinned flat against his skull, and a low, guttural snarl vibrated in his chest, so loud it competed with the sound of the receding helicopter rotors. "Get that animal out of here!" Dr. Mitchell screamed, rushing forward with a trauma pad to apply pressure to the SEAL's leg. Titan lunged. His jaws snapped shut just inches from the surgeon's wrist, the sound of his teeth clacking together, echoing through the bay like a gunshot. Dr. Mitchell stumbled backward, crashing into a tray of instruments that scattered across the floor with a deafening clatter. "He's protecting him! He thinks we're the enemy!" one of the flight medics yelled, holding his hands up defensively. His handler got hit by an IED blast. The dog took some shrapnel too, he's concussed, deafened by the explosion. He won't let anyone near the chief. He is bleeding out. Mitchell roared, his eyes wide with panic as he looked at the monitors. Rollins' blood pressure was plummeting. The monitors beeped in a frantic, terrifying rhythm. V. Fib. The man was dying right in front of them. 2 military police officers, heavily armed base security, pushed their way into the trauma bay. Seeing the standoff, the senior MP, Sergeant Miller, unholstered his Beretta M9. "Doc, we can't get a clear angle to sedate him," a frantic vet tech yelled from the doorway, holding a dart gun. "If I miss and hit the patient, or if the dog thrashes, it's over." The dog's dark, furious eyes darted around the room. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do, protect his alpha to the death. To Titan, This bright, noisy, chaotic room was filled with threats who wanted to hurt his master. "Shoot him, Doctor," Mitchell ordered, his voice trembling with desperation. "Shoot the damn dog. I have to save this man's life right now." Sergeant Miller stepped forward, raising his weapon, aiming directly at the canine's head. Titan didn't back down. He planted his paws firmer on the seal's chest, bared his blood-stained teeth, and prepared to take the bullet for his handler. "No! Wait!" The scream tore out of Evelyn's throat before she even realized she was moving. She shoved past the heavily armored MP, stepping directly into the kill zone between the drawn pistol and the furious Malinois. The room gasped. "Jenkins, get the hell back here!" "Doctor," Mitchell screamed, his face turning purple. "Are you out of your mind? He will tear your throat out!" Evelyn couldn't hear them. Her eyes were locked on the K9, and then they dropped to the tactical plate carrier the dying SEAL was wearing. It was shredded from the blast, but a small, blood-soaked morale patch was still velcroed to the chest. It was a bone frog, the unofficial mascot of the Navy SEALs. But this one had a specific Roman numeral underneath it. VIDV grew. SEAL Team 6. A wave of dizzying grief and sudden razor-sharp clarity washed over Evelyn. Her older brother, Chief Petty Officer Michael Jenkins, had worn that exact same patch. Michael had been a DEVGRU K9 handler. He had died 3 years ago in a botched raid in Yemen, bleeding out on a dark rooftop with his own Malinois standing over him, guarding him until the very end. Before his final deployment, Michael and Evelyn had sat on the porch of their childhood home in Coronado, California. He had been drinking a beer, throwing a ball for his dog, and explaining the intricate, almost telepathic bond between an operator and a Tier 1 working dog. "People think these dogs are just weapons," Evelyn Michael had told her, his voice low and serious. "But they are fiercely loyal, highly intelligent partners, and when a handler goes down, the dog's instinct is to fight everything that moves. It's a huge liability in a medevac scenario." "So what do you do?" she had asked. "We build a failsafe into their training," he had whispered, leaning in as if sharing a massive state secret, a bypass code, a verbal override that forces the dog to stand down and transfer alpha status to another friendly. "We don't tell the regular grunts. We don't even tell the brass. Only the handlers and the absolute highest tier operators know it. It's an anchor to snap them out of the red zone." Evelyn stared at Titan. The dog was hyperventilating, his eyes blown wide with combat, trauma, and fear. He wasn't a monster. He was a terrified, loyal soldier trying to save his best friend. "Nurse Jenkins, I am giving you a direct order to step aside." Captain Hayes, the base commander who had just arrived in the bay, barked. "Miller, prep to fire." "Give me 10 seconds, Evelyn shouted, her voice echoing off the tile walls. She slowly raised her hands, palms open, showing she held no weapons. She took a slow, deliberate step toward the gurney. Titan snapped furiously, his jaws clicking inches from her face. Flecks of bloody saliva hit her cheek. The heat radiating off the massive animal was intense. She could smell the gunpowder in his fur. Every survival instinct in her brain screamed at her to run, to let the MPs do their job. But she looked at David Rawlins' pale, lifeless face, and she saw her brother. She couldn't let another handler die, and she couldn't let this loyal dog be executed for doing his duty. Evelyn dropped to her knees, making herself smaller, less of a threat. She kept her eyes locked on Titan's. She didn't look away, nor did she stare with aggression. She projected calm, an anchor in the storm of the trauma bay. She took a deep breath, praying her brother's secret hadn't died with him, praying that DEVGRU hadn't changed their protocols in the last 3 years. Leaning forward until she was just inches from the dog's snapping jaws, Evelyn pitched her voice low, calm, and authoritative. Echo 6. Lot loss watchman. For a split second, nothing happened. The monitors continued their deadly flatlining screech. The MP's finger tightened on the trigger. Then, the miracle occurred. Titan froze. The violent trembling in his muscles suddenly ceased. His ears, pinned flat in aggression, slowly swiveled forward. He let out a sharp, confused huff of air through his nose, staring deep into Evelyn's eyes. "Watchman?" Evelyn repeated, her voice cracking with emotion, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. She slowly extended her right hand, palm up. The 90-pound killing machine let out a heartbreaking, high-pitched whimper. He looked down at his dying handler, then back at Evelyn. The ferocious combat dog lowered his massive head, stepping off the SEAL's chest, and gently rested his bloody snout into the palm of the rookie nurse's hand. He yielded. "Go!" Evelyn screamed, keeping her hand under the dog's chin, shielding him with her body. The medical team surged forward like a tidal wave. Dr. Mitchell was on Rollins instantly, plunging his hands into the shredded leg to clamp the massive femoral bleed. Nurses ripped open the trauma kits, shoving tubes down the operator's throat, pumping O-negative blood into his veins. "I've got the bleeder!" Mitchell yelled, his hands slick with crimson. "Push one of Epi. Get the crash cart. We're losing him. Charge to 200. Clear?" The SEAL's body arched off the table as the defibrillator delivered the shock. Evelyn stayed on the floor, wrapping her arms around Titan's thick, trembling neck. The dog buried his face in her shoulder, whimpering softly as the chaotic symphony of saving a life raged around them. She rocked the massive animal back and forth, whispering soft, comforting words into his ears, tears soaking into his blood-stained fur. "You did good, buddy," she thought, closing her eyes as the smell of copper overwhelmed her. "You did your job. Now let us do ours." But the night was far from over. As Dr. Mitchell fought to restart David Rollins' heart, the encrypted radio on the SEAL's shredded tactical vest suddenly hissed to life. The voice that came through the static wasn't a military dispatcher. It was a cold, heavily accented voice, delivering a message that made the blood in Evelyn's veins run colder than the German rain outside. The raspy, heavily accented voice, bleeding out of the encrypted radio, shattered the fragile, focused silence of the trauma bay. "Chief Rollins, you cannot run from the desert. The Skybird took you, but you carry our fire with you. Tick-tock, American." The radio clicked dead, leaving only a hiss of static. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The words hung in the air, cold and loaded with malice. Evelyn, still kneeling on the blood-slicked floor with her arms wrapped around Titan, felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The massive Belgian Malinois whined, shifting his weight, his nose twitching frantically as he sniffed the air near his handler's shattered legs. "What the hell was that?" Captain Hayes demanded, stepping forward from the doorway. "Did the enemy hijack Devgu's comms?" Dr. Mitchell didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the portable X-ray monitor that a technician had just wheeled into place. The machine had taken a rapid scan of Rollins' torso and upper thighs to check for internal shrapnel. "Oh my God," Mitchell whispered. The color completely drained from his face. He slowly stepped back from the surgical table, holding his bloodied hands up in the air. "Doc, what is it? His pressure is tanking again," one of the flight medics yelled, oblivious to the screen. "Stop what you're doing," Mitchell ordered, his voice dangerously low. "Everyone, take your hands off the patient right now." Evelyn looked up at the monitor. There, lodged deep in the soft tissue of Rollins's right pelvic cradle, inches from his femoral artery, was a perfectly cylindrical, dense shadow. It wasn't jagged like normal shrapnel. It had fins. It had a mechanical fuse. It was an unexploded 40mm high-explosive grenade. "UXO, we have unexploded ordnance in the bay," Captain Hayes roared, his military training instantly overriding his shock. "Code Black. Evacuate this room immediately. Page EOD." Absolute pandemonium erupted. The nurses and medics who had just been fighting to save Rollins' life suddenly scrambled toward the double doors, driven by the primal instinct to escape a live bomb. The heavy stainless steel trays were knocked over, scattering forceps and scalpels across the wet floor. "Jenkins, let's go," Dr. Mitchell yelled, grabbing Evelyn by the shoulder of her scrubs. Evelyn tried to stand, but Titan let out a sharp, warning bark. He didn't snap at Mitchell, but he shifted his body, placing himself squarely between Evelyn and the door, his eyes locked on Rollins' mangled hip. Suddenly, Michael's voice echoed in her memory. "Dogs don't just smell fear, Evelyn. They smell chemistry. They can sniff out a single drop of C4 in a crowded stadium." "He wasn't just protecting him from us," Evelyn gasped, realization hitting her like a physical blow. She looked at Dr. Aspid Mitchell, her eyes wide with terror. Titan knew the explosive was in there. He was trying to stop anyone from jostling it. "Evelyn, if that fuse is damaged, the slightest shift in the patient's body weight could detonate it," Mitchell pleaded, pulling on her arm. "A 40mm blast in this room will take out the entire trauma bay, the oxygen lines, and everyone in it. We have to leave him. Protocol demands it. If we leave him, he bleeds out in 5 minutes." Evelyn said, her voice shaking but her feet planted firmly on the floor. "And if he thrashes because of the pain, or if Titan jumps back up on him out of panic, that grenade goes off anyway." Mitchell looked at the dying SEAL, then at the rookie nurse, and finally at the explosive shadow on the X-ray monitor. He cursed loudly, a vile, desperate word that echoed off the tile, and let go of Evelyn's shoulder. "Captain!" Mitchell shouted toward the hallway. "Get EOD in here now, and shut off the oxygen valves to this sector." He turned back to the table, stepping carefully. "I need one surgical assist to clamp that bleeder while I try to keep his heart beating. Everyone else, out." The remaining staff fled. In seconds, the massive trauma bay was empty, save for the dying operator, a sweating surgeon, a 90-pound combat dog, and a rookie nurse who was operating entirely on adrenaline and the memory of her fallen brother. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic, agonizingly slow beep, beep, beep of Rollins' heart monitor. "Keep the dog calm, Evelyn," Mitchell instructed, his hands trembling slightly as he reached back into the open wound, using heavy hemostats to clamp a severed vein. "If that animal bumps my arm, we're all going home in bags." "Copy that," Evelyn whispered. She moved closer to the table, keeping her hand resting heavily on the back of Titan's neck. "Watchman, Titan. Stay. Watchman." The dog let out a low rumble in his chest, but remained perfectly still, his body pressed against Evelyn's leg. Minutes stretched into eternity. The air grew thick and heavy. Rollins was pale, his breathing shallow and erratic. The blood loss was catastrophic, and Mitchell was fighting a losing battle against the human body's limitations. Finally, the heavy double doors swung open. Stepping into the bay was Sergeant First Class Thomas Brody, an explosive ordnance disposal specialist encased entirely in a massive 80-pound Kevlar bomb suit. He looked like an astronaut stepping onto a hostile alien planet. Brody waddled forward, his helmet visor heavily tinted. He stopped at the edge of the surgical table, peering down at the X-ray screen and then at the catastrophic wound. "Well, Doc, you've got yourself a VOG 2-5. Brody's voice crackled through a small external speaker on his suit. "Russian-made. Nasty piece of work. The impact with the Chief's plate carrier shattered the primary casing, but the secondary fuse is jammed directly against his pelvic bone. It is armed, and the firing pin is under tension." "Can you pull it out?" Mitchell asked, sweat dripping from his nose onto his surgical mask. "My hands are too thick in these protective gloves, and I can't risk stripping the suit off in the time we have," Brody said grimly. "If I slip and hit the bone, it triggers. Doc, you have to be the one to extract it." Mitchell stared at his own hands. They were covered in blood, slick and trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. He was a trauma surgeon. He was used to moving fast, ripping through tissue to find arteries. He was not a bomb technician. "I can't," Mitchell confessed, his voice breaking. "I have a bilateral tremor. Under this kind of fine motor stress, my hands are going to shake. I'll drop it." Brody looked at Evelyn. The heavily armored EOD tech, the veteran surgeon, and the dying Navy SEAL were all at a complete standstill. Evelyn looked down at her own hands. They were perfectly still. The terrified, chaotic energy that had consumed her when the helicopter arrived was gone, replaced by a strange, icy calm. She felt a phantom weight on her shoulder, like an older brother resting his hand there to steady her. "I'll do it," Evelyn said. "Nurse Jenkins." "Absolutely not," Mitchell snapped, his eyes wide. "You are not trained for—" "My hands aren't shaking, doctor," Evelyn interrupted, her voice steady them. He held up her right hand. It was as still as carved marble. "You have to manage his vitals. You have to keep his heart beating. Walk me through it." Brody nodded slowly behind his thick visor. "She's right, Doc. We are out of time. The chief's blood pressure is crashing. If he codes again, the chest compressions will detonate the round." Mitchell swallowed hard, looking at the young nurse. He stepped back, making room for her at the patient's side. Evelyn commanded Titan to sit, keeping her left hand firmly holding his tactical harness. She stepped up to the surgical table, her right hand poised over the bloody crater in David Rollins' hip. "Listen to me very carefully, Evelyn," Brody said, his mechanized voice slow and deliberate. "You are going to slide your index and middle finger down the side of the metal casing. Do not touch the tip. The fuse is at the top. You need to grip it by the rib cylinder. When you pull, you must pull perfectly straight up. No twisting, no wiggling. If it scrapes against the pelvic bone, the friction could be enough to set it off." "Understood," Evelyn whispered. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The smell of copper and unwashed combat gear filled her lungs. She reached into the wound. The blood was warm and slick. Her fingers slid past torn muscle and shattered fascia until she felt the cold, hard steel of the grenade. It felt entirely unnatural, a piece of manufactured death buried inside a living human being. "I have it," Evelyn said softly. "Grip it tight. Don't let it slip," Brody instructed, holding open a thick, Kevlar-lined blast containment pouch. "On 3. Smooth and steady." Titan let out a high-pitched whine, sensing the terrifying spike in the room's tension. "Watchman, Titan," Evelyn whispered, her eyes never leaving the wound. "Watchman." 1, Brody counted. Mitchell held his breath, his eyes glued to the heart monitor. 2. Evelyn tightened her grip, locking her wrist, her elbow, and her shoulder into a rigid line. 3. Pull. Evelyn pulled. It felt like she was pulling a sword from a stone. The grenade resisted, held fast by the swelling tissue and the vacuum of the wound. She applied steady, relentless upward pressure. Millimeter by millimeter, the lethal cylinder emerged from the blood. The silver fuse caught the harsh glare of the surgical lights. It was terrifyingly battered, the firing pin visibly bent but held back by a fraction of an inch of mangled metal. She lifted it clear of Rollins' body. Her arm was locked out, the explosive dripping with dark red blood, suspended in the air. "Do not move," Brody ordered. He stepped forward, raising the blast pouch. With agonizing slowness, he guided the heavy Kevlar bag up and around the grenade, sealing it tightly. The loud Velcro rip of the bag closing sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "Ordnance secured," Brody breathed, a massive sigh of relief venting from his suit. "I'm getting this out of here." "Doc, he's all yours." As Brody lumbered out of the trauma bay, the spell broke. "Crash cart!" Mitchell roared, springing back to life as Rollins' monitor let out a long, continuous screech. Asystole. Flatline. Evelyn didn't back away. She grabbed the ambu bag, squeezing air into the SEAL's lungs, while Mitchell climbed onto a step stool, lacing his hands together, and began brutal, bone-cracking chest compressions. "Come on, David, stay with us," Mitchell shouted. "Push 1 of epi." For 3 minutes, it was a blur of frantic, desperate medicine. They shocked him twice. They pumped bags of blood and adrenaline into his ruined veins. Titan barked wildly, fighting his training, but Evelyn kept her knee pressed against his side, anchoring him. "Charge to 200. Clear." The shock delivered a massive jolt. The room fell silent again, waiting. Beep, beep, beep. A steady, sinus rhythm returned to the monitor. The blood pressure began to climb. Mitchell slumped against the surgical table, pulling his mask down, gasping for air as if he had been the one drowning. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes filled with a profound, unspoken respect. "Let's get him to the OR," Mitchell said quietly. "We have a leg to put back together." 5 days later, the morning sun broke through the overcast German sky, casting a warm golden light through the windows of the intensive care unit. Evelyn walked down the quiet hallway, carrying a cup of terrible hospital coffee. She paused outside room 114. Through the glass, she saw Chief Petty Officer David Rawlins propped up in bed. He was pale, heavily bandaged, and attached to a dozen monitors, but his eyes were open. Curled up at the foot of the bed, his massive head resting on Rawlins' good leg, was Titan. Evelyn gently pushed the door open. Titan's ears perked up instantly. The dog didn't growl. Instead, his tail gave a slow, rhythmic thump against the mattress. Rawlins turned his head. His eyes, hardened by years of war, softened as he looked at the young nurse. "Doc Mitchell told me what happened," Rawlins said. His voice was a gravelly whisper, rough from the breathing tube that had just been removed. "He told me you pulled the pin." "Just doing my job, Chief," Evelyn smiled faintly, stepping into the room. "He also told me," Rawlins continued, shifting slightly, wincing at the pain, "that a civilian contractor stood down my dog when the MPs were a second away from shooting him. Doc said you whispered something to him." Evelyn looked down at her coffee cup, suddenly feeling overwhelmingly shy. "I did." Rawlins stared at her intensely, studying her features. "That bypass code, it's a closely guarded secret. There are maybe 40 guys in the world who know it. But looking at you right now, I know how you got it." Evelyn looked up, her breath catching in her throat. "You have his eyes," Rawlins said softly, a sad smile touching his lips. "You're Mikey Jenkins' kid sister, aren't you?" Tears instantly welled up in Evelyn's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. "Mikey was my swim buddy in Bud, Rawlins whispered, reaching out a heavily scarred hand to stroke Titan's ears. "He was the one who taught me how to handle these dogs. When he went down in Yemen, it broke our whole platoon." Rawlins looked from the dog to Evelyn, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mikey saved my life a dozen times overseas," the SEAL said, his voice thick with emotion. "And it looks like, even from the other side, he just saved it again. Thank you, Evelyn, for not giving up on my boy. And for not giving up on me." Evelyn walked to the edge of the bed. Titan stood up, stretched, and pressed his wet nose against her hand, letting out a soft, contented sigh. "He's a good dog, David," Evelyn whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek as she scratched behind Titan's ears. "He's a very good dog." The war would rage on, and the trauma bay would inevitably fill with blood and chaos again. But in that quiet hospital room, bathed in the morning light, a circle had finally been closed. The legacy of a fallen brother had not been buried in the desert. It lived on in the courage of a rookie nurse, the survival of a warrior, and the unbreakable loyalty of a dog named Titan. If this story of incredible bravery, the unbreakable bond between a K9 and his handler, and a rookie nurse's quick thinking kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your friends to honor our fallen heroes and the medical teams who saved them. Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more gripping, real-life survival stories.